Hello my friends, welcome to my channel, Lindy's Magpie Reads. I'm Lindy, I read a lot, and I talk about books on this channel. And I talk about other things too. So I have moved from one province to another. It's been 6 weeks, but I'm still adjusting. I'm now living in Victoria, BC, where there's this lift bridge. I got to see it in action, letting a boat too tall through, so the whole bridge lifts up. I've been busy doing things like fixing the fencing in the backyard so that it's secure so our dog can't get out. There's this great bakery that's just 1 block away from us. Sourdough, wood-fired bread, and on Sundays they make pizza. So a couple of times now we have gone for pizza on Sundays. The way it works is you order and then it takes about half an hour, and right across the road there's this park, Banfield Park. So we go for a walk with the dog and it's just lovely. Come back and there's pizza to take home for lunch. We have had visitors come, a couple friends who live up island in Ladysmith. That's about an hour north of Victoria. They came for lunch last week, and on just this past Saturday I had family visiting, my brother and his wife and their 2 girls, and 2 friends of my brother and his wife, and made me feel so good, that kind of happy that I was almost crying. That's one thing about moving far away from where I grew up, is missing friends and families. So it really means a lot to have visitors. And because I had company, I made cake. So for those of you who are here for talking about cake, stick around for this next segment. Otherwise, if you just want to know more about books and Booktube kind of talk, there are chapter headings, so you should be able to navigate through this video and just skip along to the things that you are interested in. So I watch this podcast, The Splendid Table, and on one of the episodes, Hetty McKinnon was a guest. She is a Chinese-Australian chef who was talking about her latest cookbook, Family, New Vegetarian Comfort Food to Nourish Every Day. It's, I don't know, the title's a bit much, but I guess it says what the publisher wants readers to know. Why pick it up? Anyway, the recipe is for an orange and rosemary olive oil cake. And about a block from here, there's a house that has huge rosemary bushes. They're practically a hedge. And I didn't knock on the door and ask, but I did pinch off a little bit of rosemary. And when I chopped it up, I had a tablespoon. The recipe calls for 2, but I put in a tablespoon of rosemary. And for oranges, what I had was a bag of mandarin oranges, so I used those. It's a little more work to get the peel from those, because with a regular orange you can just use a microplane zester and it's pretty quick. With the mandarins, what I did was I scraped off the white part on the peel and then finally chopped up the orange part of the peel. And anyway, the cake turned out fantastic. I definitely recommend it, and I will include a link to the recipe because it is available online on the Splendid Table website. And one of these days I'm going to check out McKinnon's cookbook, Family, from the library. Stay tuned for that. Okay, now into bookish things. Now, if you are a regular viewer of my channel, thank you. I love to hear from you always. then you'll know that usually I do a Friday read. So every week I'll talk about the books that I have finished. Now, it's been a while now since my last Friday reads because I've been struggling a bit with motivation. And I suppose it's not surprising. There's a lot of emotional stuff that I'm still dealing with from the move. And having visitors has taken social energy. I love having visitors, but I'm an introvert, and after expending energy with visitors, then I need some internal reflection time. And so I think there is some of that going on as well. I have been reading a lot. As a matter of fact, I was reading so much that I was feeling overwhelmed about talking about everything. So, for example, I had a little stack of picture books out from the library, and I decided to just take them back to the library. I read them twice through, enjoyed them very much, but the thought of making a video about them was stressing me out. So I could tell by the relief I felt when I returned them that that was a good decision on my part. I have found that when I make videos talking about the books that I've finished, if I've got more than 6 or 7 to talk about, it starts to be too much. It's too overwhelming. And I read about a book a day. So if I don't do a video every week, then it just starts to snowball and it's hard to handle. So what I decided was I don't need to talk about every book that I finish. So I will try that for a while and see what happens. And I've now got 11 books that I finished since my last video. I'm not counting those picture books, but I'm not going to talk about them all today. So we'll just see how far I get. I'm going to start with the book that I finished most recently, just last night, The English Understand Wool. It is by Helen DeWitt, and it's basically a short story. It's only 70 pages, maybe a really short novella. It's a story of a young woman. She's 17, and she's talking about how her mother raised her to appreciate the finest things. Like, it gets very extravagant. And there's a point where she learns that everything she thought she knew about her parentage was wrong. And so she is writing the story for a publisher. She sold her story, and her interaction with the publisher is the main thing. So there's a mystery, a crime, but basically it's a story about the publishing industry. Very satirical, funny, and a delightful story. It's weird, and I loved it. I just loved it. So The English Understand Wool is a kind of story you can read in an hour easily. And so I just want to mention that my sweetie got me this year's short story advent calendar. And I am really looking forward to starting the first story on December the 1st. They are all individually packaged in like a pamphlet format and beautifully designed. The editor is Michael Hingston, and the designer is Natalie Olsen. Every one of these is like a work of art. I mean, every one of the collections is like a work of art. And we are going to be away overnight on November 30th and coming back on December 1st. I've decided I'm taking the first story with me because I like to read it first thing in the morning. So that's what I'm doing in December. This is an important read for me. One thing that I didn't mention about Helen DeWitt is I have read other books by her. The novel Lightning Rods, which is so bizarre, out there kind of satire, and also a collection of short stories. I think it's called Some Tricks. And again, very weird, but also satisfying. And this next book that I'm going to tell you about, August Blue by Deborah Levy, is like that. Strange. Not satire, but just enigmatic and a puzzle. I listened to the audiobook. It's read by Alix Dunmore, and it's only 4 hours long, so really quick, which is a good thing because it took a while for me to feel invested in it. As I said, it is, cryptic. It starts out with a woman who's sure that she has a doppelganger, and yeah, it's strange, but by the time I got invested in it, I was totally invested. Of the other Barbara Levy novels that I've read 3 others: Hot Milk, Swimming Home, and The Man Who Saw Everything. And I think it's most like that last one, The Man Who Saw Everything. She's smart. She has a kind of circular way of telling the story, keeps coming back to the same things, and exploring issues of grief, loss, memory, that sort of thing. But I would have to say, out of all her books, including the memoirs of hers that I've read, this is probably my least favorite. Now, these next books that I'm going to tell you about, I was led to them because of an article that I saw online about shadow banning. So Danny Ramadan had one of his children's books banned in the Waterloo Catholic School Board. So that's in Southern Ontario, and the whole district banned 4 books that are on a yearly reading program. It's called the Forest of Reading, and it's promoted all through Ontario at schools from kindergarten all the way up to high school. So there's different divisions. They're all named for trees like blue spruce and silver birch and red maple, and I find it quite confusing because on the website you can't see what age group it is. You have to click in to find out more about who the audience is for each of those tree categories. I guess if you're more familiar with it, then if you know, you know. Anyway, I will link the article below, but the thing that really caught my attention is that all 4 of these books have queer content. And so the school libraries have been directed to move these books into the professional section of the library. So it's a teacher-only access. And they say that children can read them, but first a teacher must provide them with Catholic context. And the author, Danny Ramadan, who, as I said, one of his books is on this list, he said, that's how homophobia works. They're restricting access based on the context that it's queer. And the response from the school board, they explained that family life curriculum begins in grade 7 and 8. This is the senior manager of communications. She explained that these restrictions were put in place to avoid any students reading subject matter that maybe is not intended for them. So Ramadan's book is intended for about grade 3 and 4, and it just seems ridiculous that they're saying, well, once you're in grade 7 and 8, you can read this book. Anyway, yeah, it's homophobia, it's wrong. And I not only picked up that particular book, which is Salma Writes a Book, but also an earlier one in the series, which is Salma Makes a Home. So in these two books, Salma is a Syrian girl who moved from Damascus to Vancouver with her mom, and in the first book they're expecting her father to be arriving soon. So there's been a long delay before he could join them in Canada. The description of how she's fearful and tearful as she thinks about her father joining them, the kind of complicated emotions that a child can have. She's probably 8 or 9 years old, and she is worried that her dad won't like Vancouver. He's going to miss Damascus too much. He's going to want to go back, and then she and her mother are going to be really sad because he won't be with them. So she feels a responsibility once he arrives to make sure that he loves the country, and she doesn't want him to talk about Syria, doesn't want him to talk about Damascus. And I found it so well done. Now this is an early chapter book, so for readers who are just beginning to read longer books, the chapters are really short. There's lots of white space margin and white space between the lines, that's the leading, and illustrations. The art is by Anna Braun. Now this is a Muslim family, and so references to Ramadan and fasting are just part of the everyday life. I love how Arabic words are usually explained right there in the text. I start out with Salma showing her mother that she's made a paper lantern, and her mother says, "What a wonderful piece of art, Salma. A great way to celebrate the arrival of our holy month." "I based it on my own memories," Salma says. She remembers seeing al-Messaher walking the alleyways of Damascus, but right before sunrise. His son walked beside him sleepily, holding a real lantern in his hand to light the way. Al-Messaher knocked on a little drum to wake people up to eat their suhoor, the pre-fasting meal. So at the beginning, she's happy about her memories of Damascus, but through the story, we find that she feels like she's starting to forget. And then when her father arrives and he's talking about those memories, she wants him to stop and just focus on his new country, Canada. And in the passage where this issue is resolved, when her parents talk to her about what's going on, because she's been trying to hide it from them, her Baba says, "It's okay to have two homes, Salma, one that you live in and one that lives in you." And she doesn't quite grasp what this means, but it's a comfort. It makes her feel better. And in the last part of the story, she does integrate that idea of having more than one home. Loved it. So the next book in the series is the one that was banned at the Waterloo School Board, and that one's called Salma Writes a Book. And the issue in this one is that Salma's mother has a brother who moved to Canada a number of years ago, and he's been kind of estranged from the family, living in another city, but he and his husband moved to Vancouver, and so then they start seeing them, and her mother is not happy about talking about her brother being gay, doesn't want to answer Salma's questions about what's going on and why her mother is angry with her brother. And it's tied so well with Salma being excited that she is going to be a big sister. She knows she's got a sibling on the way, her mother's pregnant. She wants to be an excellent big sister, but she finds that her mother is maybe not a good role model of how to be a good sister. So again, the issues in the book, they're presented in a way that is perfectly suited to children who are in grade 3 or 4, maybe grade 5. But these are real social issues, and I'm just so happy that these books exist. Next, I want to talk about an audiobook, a collection of essays by Mary Oliver. It's called Upstream. And the audiobook that I listen to is by Pushkin, and there are 3 different poets who read. I will include information in the description box down below. And I keep a commonplace book. So what I do is, when I'm reading a book from the library, and I use tabs to mark passages, I will sometimes write those down in my commonplace book. And also when I'm listening to an audiobook, when I come to passages that interest me, I bookmark them and then later transcribe them. With Upstream, I wanted to transcribe so many passages that I really need to own a copy. And in fact, I think I do have a print copy somewhere, but I haven't unearthed it in the unpacking yet. Anyway, this is the kind of thing she says. In the beginning, I was so young and such a stranger to myself. I hardly existed. I had to go out into the world and see it and hear it and react to it before I knew at all who I was, what I wanted to be. She covers very similar themes that she does in her poetry, that sense of wonder and connection to the natural world. And she also talks about her childhood friends who were poets like Walt Whitman and Ralph Waldo Emerson and Edgar Allan Poe and Frost and Wordsworth. And when she was talking about Leaves of Grass, I really wanted to then pick up Leaves of Grass. So that is one of the downsides of downsizing my book collection, because I did have a copy which I gave away. So I could get it from the library, but sometimes, you just want it right now. This is what she said that made me want to go back to Leaves of Grass. Leaves of Grass is indeed a sermon, a manifesto, a utopian document, a social contract, a political statement, an invitation to each of us to change. All through the poem, we feel Whitman's persuading force, which is his sincerity, and we feel what the poem tries continually to be, the replication of a miracle. A little later she says, how does the tender not become mincing? How does authority avoid pomp? How does cadence, repeated and repeated, summon rather than lull? Good questions. Anyway, in another part, she's talking about she and her longtime lesbian partner who lived in Provincetown, and she says previously there were small shops because it was a small town. Now there are small shops because the tourists want to think they are still in that little town which has vanished. It is good business now to appear antiquated, with narrow aisles and quaintly labeled jars. There's a really fancy grocery store 5 minutes walk from where I live, And it is just how she describes, with those narrow aisles and some beautifully displayed items for sale, food items from around the world, and it is so expensive. You could buy a box of chocolate for $90. You can get $60 bottles of olive oil. There's a room right now that is all Italian nougat. It's just so beautiful. I just love to go there and look. So I'm going to talk about more poetry. This time it is a collection called A Brief and Endless Sea. It's by Barbara Pelman. I went to this book launch earlier this month, and it was a delight to hear Barbara read from it. I love hearing poets read their own work. These are poems that are quite autobiographical. They're the kind of poems that you can get the full meaning the first time that you read it through. They're very straightforward, but also beautiful, and often have a little twist at the end. You think it's going in one direction and then it's something else. I'm going to read you a very short piece that I found comforting. It's called Do Not Be Daunted by the Enormity of the World's Grief. The prologue is a line from the Talmud. You are not obligated to complete the work, neither are you free to abandon it. Every tiny bit counts. Choose peace in your own life. Forgive your own flailing self, your wrinkled face, your wrecked knees. Make friends with failure. Praise the getting up. Forgive the falling down. Buy the electric bike, the solar roof, the heat pump. Learn to say no quietly and yes exuberantly. Praise the bent world. Offer it whatever solace you can. Next is another audiobook. So short, it's only 27 minutes long. It's by Annie Ernaux, and the English title is The Young Man. I listened to the French edition. I like to keep up my fluency, so in French it's Le Jeune Homme, and it was read by Françoise Gillard. Now, normally I listen to audiobooks at 1.25 speed. Lately, I have been listening at just the normal recorded speed. It's maybe a sign that I am in a more contemplative mood, maybe, that I'm thinking slowly. I don't know. I'm taking time to absorb things anyway. And the thing about this audiobook, for the first time ever, I slowed the speed down less than normal speed. So in Libby, you can scrub instead of choosing pre-selected speeds, and I slowed it to 90% of the recorded speed. And that was perfect for me to catch all of the French. So that's a tip for you if you're listening to something in a language that's not your everyday language. It's been a long time for me since I've spoken French. My mother's first language was French, and I went to a French language school, but as an adult, I don't speak French very often. So, okay, what is The Young Man about? Annie Ernaux is a memoirist, a Nobel Prize winning memoirist, and in this story, she is recounting a love affair she had with a young man who was nearly 30 years younger than she was. And this took place in the very, very end of the 20th century, and it only lasted for a few months. But where it took place was Rouen, the town where Ernaux grew up, and where an important thing happened to her when she was much younger. As a matter of fact, before this young man was even born. And Ernaux just has this wonderful way of expressing herself, talking about intimate details, which also kind of reflect on a larger common human experience. I didn't know if I wanted to read about a love affair. Well, I loved it. It was great. And I managed to participate in Bob the Bookerer's November. This is something he started last year to share the gift of Ernaux with the world, and he likes puns, hence November. Thanks, Bob. Okay, this is going to be my last one. This is a graphic novel retelling of Beowulf, and it is for kids. So, yes, an epic poem called Beowulf. It is by Weinersmith and Boulet. Boulet is a French cartoonist, and Zach Weimersmith is an American writer and cartoonist. The illustrations are all by Boulet. They're grayscale, delightful details. I am going to flip through it so you can see. At the very end, he has a fantastic explanation of what Beowulf is, the whole history of it. He shows the first few lines in the Old English format, and then he says, in modern English, it means something like this. Okay, story time. A long time ago, there was a tribe called the Spear Danes, and they had awesome kings who did awesome stuff. And they had a guy named Scyld Scefling who scared the pants off many enemies. But in this old poetry, you couldn't just say it that way. If you did, people would think you were doing it wrong. In their way of doing poetry, you need these short separated lines, and they have to use several words that start with the same letter. That's a little hard in modern English, but it would go something like this. So hey, story time. Spear Danes were cool, crazy good kings, like Scyld Scefling. Sheesh, what a warrior. Messing up, many a meanie pants, famous for fighting, frightening foes. This is cool, but pretty hard to read for modern people who aren't used to it. So, in my version, I kept the alliteration. That's when at least two words start with the same letter, and sometimes kept the pauses between half lines by using a comma or two. But I didn't do the teeny tiny lines or the careful metrical rules the original poet used. My lines are about twice as long, much more variable, and have quite a lot more alliteration. So my opening goes, listen to the lives of the long ago kids, the world fighters, the parent unminding kids, the improper, the politeness proof, the unbowed bully crushers, the bedtime breakers, the raspberry blowers, fighters of fun killers, fearing nothing, fated for fame. And then he goes on to explain something else that he stole from the poem, which is a kenning. It's a sort of riddle with words, and explains that in the original Beowulf, the poet at one point refers to seawood. What's seawood? It's a boat. He also talks about the whale road. What's that? It's the sea. And he talks about the storm of swords. What's that? A battle. Awesome, right? So, yeah, I love the afterword, and the poem itself, the whole epic narrative is fantastic. The kids, they build a tree house, they overdose on sugar, they raise their juice boxes high, but they make a lot of noise. And there is a neighbor, an evil neighbor, one age-withered night walker, nursed more wickedness than all the others. He would stride the starless dark, staring over hedge, stirring his temper, harrowing his hearing, hating the gum smacking, the blowing of bubbles, the butt jokes and belching laughter, the bursting of bang snaps, the vast volumed video games of no educational value whatsoever. Oh, how he listened by night, loathing tree hearts, fun lovers. Mr. Grindle he was called, for his father was Mr. Grindle, and his mother was Mrs. Grindle, and that is how names work. From Grindle's family grew all the fun grinders, the grim-faced joy gobblers, and so on. Beowulf. Okay, it's for kids who love language. It is for everyone of all ages who love and celebrate silliness and language and poetry. Yeah, it's so much fun. So I'm going to stop there. That's all I'm going to tell you about today. Thank you very, very much for watching. I really appreciate hearing from you. I appreciate that you stick by me even when I'm not quite so regular with my videos. Please leave me some comments down below and stick around if you want to hear one more poem from A Brief and Endless Sea. There's a poem about a pomegranate in here, and I filmed myself preparing a pomegranate. So if you're interested in watching some pomegranate action, stick around. I will see you again soon. Bye for now. Pomegranate by Barbara Pelman. Seeds carefully scooped from their tight nest, nail polish red, apple of paradise red, don't give a damn red, brothel red, her price is above rubies red, that red. There is a trick to opening one. First, slice off the top under the stem, and the fruit opens neatly into 8 sections, each covered by its white, translucent blanket. Little jewels coaxed into a bowl, onto the yogurt, into the mouth. The juice, red-toothed crunch of the seed. The rabbis say there are 613 seeds, like the 613 mitzvahs, deeds to guide your days, written in the Torah, 248 do's and 365 don'ts. Do not gossip. Do not testify falsely. Respect your parents. Do not insult anyone. Do not engage in astrology. Rest on the 7th day. The rabbis suggest that the tree in the middle of the garden was not an apple, but a pomegranate. How much longer a time from ignorance to knowledge, from innocence to sin, time to contemplate this seminal action. Eve sitting down in the grass, struggling to cut through the thick skin, soon covered in pomegranate blood. An apple is so much faster, a quick bite, not a careful, tool required, pull out each seed, one at a time, premeditated temptation. And why not? The mysterious fall, the necessary path outward, from the garden to desert, from shelter to storm, still red-handed. I offer a pomegranate to my grandson, age 5. Here's how you open it, I show him, and he gets to work, patiently pulling out each seed. We are bloodied by juice on the floor, on the counter, our hands murdering the fruit.
My fingers mistype the word each time. Pomegranate, the poem inside the fruit. Delicious words I feed to my grandson. Raven, hawthorn, Oregon junco. Metaphor, migratory persimmon. Words in our mouths, 613 of them. Again, that was the poem Pomegranate by Barbara Pelman in her collection A Brief and Endless Sea.